So I've been meaning to write this down for some time, but haven't had the time nor clear mind to do it. I had an experience on Salvia that was, is, and remains incomparable to anything I've ever experienced in my life, and it's still affecting me in a very big and negative way. I was pretty new to smoking cannabis. I'd done it a couple times in high school, but it's only been in the past couple months that I smoked it regularly. And by regularly, I mean approximately 3 times a week. At first, it was a sort of time-stretched feeling that I liked, and then it became a more introspective, more self-examining experience, and I usually didn't like what I saw. Anyways, fast forward a couple more weeks, and I decided I wanted to try acid for the first time. I took 2 hits and had a great trip. Visuals weren't too crazy, but it was a mindfuck for sure. Words started to lose their meanings, and musical phrases seemed just as valid a form of communication as a verbal phrase. Anyways, my buddy tells me he's got Salvia. I had heard of it, and at this point I was really interested in trying any drug I could get my hands on. Essentially, my mindset was this: hey, I've done LSD, I could do any drug. The only drug I knew that would be stronger than acid was DMT. I knew all drugs created different reactions in different people, but I honestly didn't expect much from Salvia because, 1, it was legal. 2, everyone I knew who took it told me they thought it was like weed. Harmless enough, right? As I get to my friend's place, he tells me that he had a crazy dreamlike trip where he was hang gliding over Kansas or something the night before, and it scared him, so he didn't want to repeat. Hang gliding? Shit, I'll hang glide. So he gives me the pipe, fills it with Salvia, lights it for me, and as I inhale, he tells me to breathe it in deep and hold. I do as I'm told and hold the smoke in for at least 15 to 20 seconds. Zeppelin's No Quarters in the background. I'm ready to have a cool trip. Now let me interrupt for a second. I didn't know what extract it was. It really didn't matter in my mind. I guess what most people smoke is about 5 times, 10 times, or 20 times. According to my friend who got it from another friend, this was 90 times. I know there's some debate about extract levels and potency, but this is all I know about the Salvia I personally smoked. Needless to say, I had no clue I was in store for a level 5 trip into another fucking dimension. Then, out of nowhere, the second I exhaled, I felt like someone had punched me in the face. The air left my lungs and I was in the most vulnerable state in my entire life. For some reason, the dark texture of the Salvia reminded me of poison, and suddenly I felt like I had just smoked lead or something. Almost immediately, extremely venomous-looking kaleidoscope patterns filled most of my vision. The only thing I could make out was my fucking phone on the table. I struggled to breathe and I could hardly speak, so all I could muster was, "Get that out of here," as I pointed to the phone, its LED screen shining through the fractal shapes. I think at that point I didn't even know what a phone was, but for some reason it needed to go. My friend took it and put it in the back room. When he returned, I was a soulless shell. I felt the most intense feeling of deja vu as all sense of self died. I had been here before, now why the fuck would I ever return? The idea of taking this drug recreationally seemed as naive, foolish, and immature as anything you could ever imagine. It was like hell, honestly, in the sense that you could have never imagined something so horrifying and evil that it really is ineffable. It's purely impossible to explain, but you're there, and you're definitely experiencing it. There is nothing in this dimension to relate it to. Quite literally, there are no words to explain what I felt, other than complete and utter despair and fear. Reality just broke apart, and I was left in this fractal void. I couldn't speak. I couldn't feel any part of my body. Ideas broke down to the point where I couldn't think for myself. The images I was seeing were more intense than I can even register, so much so that the entire experience was sort of like sensory overload overdriven to the max. I guess my eyes were open and I was just sitting there with a stupid look on my face, but I was in a completely different dimension. I can remember a couple parts of this extremely confusing and disorienting experience, but like I said earlier, it's hard to put into words. My friend asked me something like, "You trippin'?" But it just kept skipping, like, tripping. Suddenly, the words lost their meanings and it became really sloppy sounding. The visual skipped with it, and it was like everything in the room started to pull apart, and I started to see layers within everything. It was kind of like the cover of Pink Floyd's Umaguma, but everything was losing its detail and gaining new detail. The visuals were kind of like if you could imagine flying through an image or maybe traveling through two mirrors facing each other and just having the pattern of what you're seeing fall into itself and then reform and repeat. Now, this sounds cool and all, but at this point I had no clue I was under any kind of drug. I didn't know who I was or where I was. I just had this feeling, an extremely overwhelming feeling, that I had caused this disaster. I somehow did something extremely bad that caused the universe to collapse on itself. This was an extremely personal experience, and I felt no connection to any other life forms at all. I was a prisoner in my own mind. I built reality, and now I accidentally did something that just brought everything crashing down. It was a devastating solipsist experience. I remember the feeling that within the fractal was a choir of cartoonesque objects created in the kaleidoscope pattern that were singing to me about the trip, ushering me in. I remember seeing twisted pictures of my friend's face, but nothing was disjunct or cut up like a film. It was all a fluid evolution from one thing to another, but it was so complex and overwhelming that my mind could not comprehend what I was seeing. Everything was alien, nothing was real or even tangible. I could see it clearly, and yet it somehow was so intense, so bizarre, that it eluded my mind's ability to process it all. Oh, and all the while I was listening to Zeppelin's The Ocean, the constant beat and Robert Plant's Aha playing in the background, but I didn't even remember it until weeks later under weed listening to the same record. I felt gravity's pull, but it was pulling me sideways. I felt an extremely strong tug downward, and this intensified as the trip became more and more intense. Suddenly, I felt like I couldn't grasp what I was seeing anymore. Not that I could before, but before I felt like I was a slave to the hallucinations. I couldn't think for myself. I couldn't reassure myself that I was on a drug. My mind was spent, completely. I felt like a vegetable who couldn't even grasp what he was seeing. Now, my mind was trying to grasp it, but it couldn't. I felt my mind desperately trying to grab at ideas, but it couldn't quite reach. This inability to grasp the trip, coupled with unbearable pins and needles and an extreme downward pull, started to create some sensation of self, or a body, but I felt like it was stretched out over the entire field of my vision. I had become the two-dimensional image of this warped and constantly moving alternate dimension. Suddenly it began to fall apart, and I felt like I was free-falling through this picture, while I was the picture. As my field of vision was warped and reassembling and being pulled apart, I felt my own body falling apart. Now, while this was all happening, I suppose I got up, started stumbling across the room, knocked a bunch of shit over, and then fell back and almost broke my friend's table. Needless to say, all the glass pieces were knocked on the floor, and I was stumbling around like some kind of village drunk in some old Irish novel. Suddenly, as I was fighting for my life, trying to climb out of the layers of reality that were falling around me, I saw my friend's girlfriend's face trying to hold me. Apparently, they were trying to subdue me for some time, but being that I was racing for my life in another dimension, falling to my death through millions of layers of reality, it was a little hard to get through to me. But the second I saw her face, I suddenly realized that I was a human, that I had taken a drug, even that I was a sentient being. All of that went out the window with just a little bit of some good old salvia. My only instinct was to attempt to climb out of this racing, descending, swirling fractal picture. I was drenched in sweat to the point where my clothes were dripping. My heart was racing at 1,000 beats per minute, and I could hardly speak as my friends placed me in a chair, asking me what I saw. I told them to give me a minute to regain my composure. Much of the room was knocked over, but I was surprised the whole room wasn't completely destroyed because I felt like I must have been clawing away at reality, desperately trying to escape from my personal hell. The only way I can honestly describe how I felt falling was down and to the right. The three-dimensional world fell apart, and I could only perceive things in a two-dimensional light. Jesus Christ, my entire perception of reality was annihilated under the drug. The term ego death doesn't even begin to describe what I felt, but there was nothing to be gained from where I was. It was pure insanity to the nth degree. I'd gone in expecting some kind of spiritual experience or something meaningful that I could come away with, but there was none of that in Salvia land. This was pure unfiltered madness to a degree I wouldn't wish on anyone. This is where I started having problems. Right when I came back from Salvia land, my friends let me lie down and watch a movie with them. I was shaking so hard, I just wanted to lay down and relax. They encouraged me to smoke a bowl. I felt like I was midway through an acid trip and the weed just made it stronger. As we watched the film, I felt like the people on screen were really strange looking, and as we ate some food, I felt myself falling back into the Salvia. Not in the sense that I saw visuals, but my mind was falling back into that strange place, and I could see in my mind's eye exactly what I was hours earlier. The next couple times I smoked weed were similar, intense flashbacks to Salvia, to the point where it truly disturbed me. Then one day, another friend smoked me out with some hash he smokes daily. Suddenly, I had acid-like thoughts and I had to backtrack just to realize I was in the room with him. Time to go, I thought, and went back to my car, but it was too strong to drive. I could barely talk thanks to the cotton mouth. I tried calling a friend but could barely communicate. Since then, I've been getting stronger and stronger reactions to weed. When I first started smoking after Salvia, first couple weeks, I would feel the Salvia sensation, extreme pins and needles, and I would feel like I'm being pulled downward. I could play with my depth perception, but sometimes if I stared at something too long, I got the sensation that there was no depth perception, that I was looking at a two-dimensional image that covered my entire field of vision, and then I could see little parts of that image moving and falling apart, like a much less intense version of what went down in Salvia land. People's faces also seem to be hovering over their face. When I'm stoned around my friend who is my Salvia trip sitter, if I look at him directly in the face, the rest of the room, or my perception of everything in my peripheral creates this kind of tunnel effect that leads straight to his face. Another thing I think I remember feeling under Salvia, but I'm not quite sure I remember it. Pictures start to dance just like a low-level acid trip. Calling it strange is more than a colossal understatement. Weed has been taking me to a weird twisted version of the normal world, something it never did before. When I'm sober, floaters and white specks really dominate my vision. It gets kind of distracting when I look up at the sky. The reason I'm putting this out there is because the day before yesterday was the worst. I felt anxiety and fear unlike anything I've ever felt. I started to question my own reality. The way objects look on weed began to look extremely disturbing. People started to look disturbingly alien, as if it was the first time I'd ever laid eyes on a human before. I felt as if I was realizing something humans aren't supposed to realize. I was beginning to see things working behind the scenes, and it was frightening as hell. It's kind of like that splinter in your mind that reality isn't what you've always thought it to be, and now that you know the truth, it will haunt you forever. I have trouble even relating to my memories, my past, my identity, who I thought I was, and who I wanted to be. For the first time in my life, I feel afraid. Of what? I have no idea. But it's this feeling, it's deep within me. I think I might have to stop all drugs for good if I ever want to feel normal again. I've never felt so alien. I never knew anyone could feel so alien and alone. I never felt much emotion throughout my life, never was afraid of much, never cried over anything, never was very emotionally attached to anybody or anything. But now I'm scared of something I can't even put into words, and I've broken down a couple times trying to explain it to people. My biggest fear now is that when I'm not feeling this intense and overwhelming panic, I can't even relate to it in the slightest bit, and all that's on my mind is, I feel fine, hey, I'm ready to do some more drugs. It started as a typical weekend as a senior in high school. A few buddies and I camped for the night at Fossil Creek in northern Arizona. Nothing crazy. We spent the day swimming in the creek and had a bottle of Jack Daniels and 5 grams of bud to keep us entertained for the night. It was on the hike out of the canyon that things became interesting. As a drug-obsessed teenager, I not only tried my fair share of psychoactive substances, but I'd also studied the local flora for anything psychoactive. While hiking up the trail, I noticed a beautiful plant that I identified as Angel's Trumpet. I had looked into this plant just a little bit and couldn't recall much of what I had read. I just knew that the seed pods were the part that would make you trip. Being overconfident and completely foolhardy, I picked 6 seed pods off the plant and continued hiking back to my friend's car. When we arrived in the parking lot, I looked at my friends to see who wanted to trip with me on the Angel's Trumpet seeds. We had a couple-hour car ride ahead of us back to Phoenix, and I thought it would be fun to feel the come up and start tripping while we ventured home. It was a Sunday afternoon and my parents were going to be out of town until Monday morning. I figured I would have plenty of time to sober up from the trip before school or my parents returned. My friend Anthony, the most adventurous of the bunch, was the only one who wanted to take the seeds with me. Pussies, we joked with our buddies as we split the seed pods, 3 each, between ourselves. We emptied out the seeds onto napkins and looked at each other as we were about to unknowingly make the worst mistake of our lives. To this day, 4 years in the future, I still have nightmares about this experience and wish I could go back to this pivotal moment to stop myself. There were dozens of seeds in each of the napkins. We were so reckless and sure of ourselves that we didn't even bother to count them. Down the hatch, we swallowed them whole and washed the vile seeds back with orange Gatorade. We got into the back of my other friend's old Toyota 4Runner and hit the road back to Phoenix. It wasn't long before we started feeling the preliminary effects, and I was feeling nervous about what we had done. My limbs were starting to go numb, my mouth was drier than hell, and an overwhelming sense of dread and remorse was beginning to chip away at the fragile edges of my teenage ego. The Arizona step scene out the window passed through my field of vision in a haze, and I looked into Anthony's face to gauge how he was reacting to the sinister medicine we had consumed. Face is an index of mind. The words of the Indian sage to a young Terence McKenna reverberated through my skull as I saw the same nervous yet controlled expression on Anthony's face that I was projecting onto mine. For the time being, we were okay, but my mind was racing as the uncomfortable side effects continued to mount in intensity. Had we poisoned ourselves? Was that even the right plant? I don't even remember what this drug is supposed to feel like. Why did I get us into this? All of this spun around and around in my head while I did my best to remain calm and not let on to any of my friends that I was on the verge of freaking out. At one point, I had my friend pull over on the side of the highway so I could piss. My bladder felt like it was going to burst from all the water we had been drinking during the hike out of the canyon and the orange Gatorades we drank for the Datura seeds. But as I stood on the side of the road with cars zipping by, I couldn't piss more than a few drops. It was the worst sensation of trying to force the pee out, and even though I got out only a few drops, I strangely still felt relieved afterwards. By this point, the heavy body load, cotton mouth, and numbness in my arms and legs were in full effect, but Anthony and I weren't feeling much of anything in terms of psychoactive effects yet. We arrived back in Phoenix, and I was the first stop to be dropped off. I occasionally tripped acid and mushrooms alone back in these days, so my friends thought nothing of me being home alone for the rest of whatever this experience was going to be. If anything, they thought it was a good thing that my parents weren't around to catch me tripping on a random plant we found in the wilderness. I got out of the car, told Anthony to call me later that night so we could check in, and waved goodbye to my friends as I opened the garage door and stepped into my parents' empty house. From this point on, my memories of this experience are very fragmented and slippery. On a high dose of Datura like Anthony and I took, time ceases to be linear, fantasy and reality become intertwined and completely indistinguishable, and the tripper is brought to the brink of death to experience horrors and confusions that are too fantastic to encapsulate in English. I remember it being nighttime and I was outside in my backyard, sitting at the table next to the pool and smoking a joint with Anthony. We were shooting the shit, talking about nothing like we usually did during our smoke sessions, when out of the blue he said, "Look," in a serious, alarmed tone. Under the patio light, I clearly saw the irises of his eyes morph into an orangish gill pattern, like the underside of a psilocybin mushroom, and his pupils the size of dinner plates, black voids leading to I knew not where. I craned my head around, following his gaze, and saw the outline of a woman standing in the darkness on the opposite side of the backyard. "What do you want?" I blurted out in a shaky voice. I quickly glanced back at Anthony to reassure myself and check his reaction, but he was no longer there. I realized I wasn't sitting at the patio table or smoking a joint at all. The context had completely changed. I was standing at the edge of the backyard under the cool moonlight with my back up against the concrete block wall. The back door to the house was wide open, and the woman still stood in the dark on the opposite side of the yard. "Who are you?" I asked again, feeling unbelievably terrified, more scared than I had ever felt in my life. She didn't reply, but I mentally felt a response of, "There's no need to fear," as a flood of both disturbing and beautiful hallucinations came rushing over me. A river of violet energy crashed out of the sky like water and rushed around me and through me in a violent torrent. I felt I could barely stand, and I saw the strangest hallucinatory fragments flash through my mind. Demons peeking around windows, their bulging white eyes darting side to side in search of something. Tibetan Buddhists chanting in a monastery at the top of a windy, snow-covered mountain. The gears inside the engine of an alien spacecraft flying high above my backyard, observing my reaction and the contents of my mind. These images kept coming and coming, and I remember in flashes being able to actually see myself and the woman standing there in the backyard from a third-person, aerial perspective. After this episode of intense and delirious hallucination, I regained consciousness sitting in the dark in the middle of the backyard. I was extremely agitated, confused, and afraid, but otherwise felt relatively sober. This is just one of the sinister effects of Datura. You snap in and out of lucidity unpredictably throughout the experience, and there is never a clear "I'm coming up" or "it's wearing off" feeling to judge. I walked back into the house via the wide open door and frantically tried to reconstruct what I had been doing for the past several hours that I had no recollection of. I walked to my bedroom, and to my horror, upon opening the door, my mom and dad were seated on my bed, staring at me fixedly. Their faces were distorted and blurry, and my dad looked right through me and shouted, "What are you on?" in a voice that pierced the very essence of my being. I recoiled and turned away, knowing that I was busted, but when I turned back to reply, my parents were no longer there. The room was empty, the house was completely quiet. I stood frozen in the doorway, hearing only the blood rush through my body and a slight ringing in my ears, completely confused and overwhelmed by the entire experience. At some point in the silence, I heard the distant sound of multiple cars turning onto my street and slamming the brakes in front of my house. I was already paranoid beyond belief and raced to the living room to peer out the window and see who or what had come to visit me in the middle of the night. My heart sank as I saw 2 squad police cars parked right outside my driveway and an officer standing out in the road under the streetlight. Without even thinking, my immediate reaction was to flee the house and get as far away as possible. I ran out the back door and hopped the fence into my neighbor's backyard. The Datura had severely impaired my motor skills, and where I'd usually be able to hop the fence with no problem, I could now barely get myself up and over. From my neighbor's backyard, I went through their gate and kept running through neighborhoods until I reached the edge of the desert. This escape is like a fog of paranoia and insanity in my memory. I was running for my life through people's property, and I'm sure causing a ridiculous amount of commotion and noise in the dead quiet of a suburban Sunday night. My pursuers were morphing like a liquid in my mind. They started as the police, but at times I was running from demons or the idea of evil itself. I heard people on foot running after me. I would turn back while running and see pitch black shadow people in the distance. I heard the beat of big leather wings behind my right shoulder. I irrationally thought that if I made it to the desert, I'd be able to evade whoever was after me and hide out until daylight, but in reality, I had no clue where I was going or what I was doing. I'd grown up in the area and knew every street like the back of my hand, but that night I would turn onto a familiar street and suddenly find myself in a different neighborhood altogether. Streets looped and repeated themselves. I would look down into the distance and see something random and impossible. I saw a middle-aged man laying out on a lawn chair, tanning himself even though it must have been 2 or 3 in the morning. He lifted his sunglasses to look at me and gave me a wink before laying back down. I saw gigantic moths swarming around a streetlight and inexplicable lights in the sky. Everything was a fear-ridden blur. The next thing I remember is being restrained to a gurney and loaded in the back of an ambulance. The EMT looked down at me and had the head of a man and the body of a snake. It looked like the sun was setting behind his head. "What did you take?" he asked in a demanding tone. Through my cracked lips and parched mouth, I managed to reply, "Angel's trumpet." I looked down at my body and saw that my legs were covered in cuts and bruises. My shirt was ripped and filthy with dirt. It felt like an eternity passed on the ride to the hospital. I was confused as if I was being taken to the hospital, to jail, or being abducted by aliens. I later learned that at one point I asked the EMT why they were abducting me and when I could go back to Earth. I said all kinds of crazy things in conversation with the EMTs and people that I imagined to be present. In my mind, Anthony, or something that was impersonating Anthony, was in the ambulance with me for most of the ride and was acting like a guardian spirit. He would point to or pick up different medical devices in the back of the ambulance and explain what they did or how they were used. I would look down at my hands and see that I was holding a copy of whatever thing he was explaining to me, and then I would snap out of it and realize I was still bound to the gurney. There was an analog clock on the wall, and while Anthony was explaining it to me, it morphed into the wheel of samsara. I saw beings going through the never-ending cycle of birth and death, being born as animals, dying and reborn as angels, taking human births and being born as my family and friends. It was an endless cycle, all revolving around this wheel of existence within the clock. I felt as if I had died and was being held in some kind of waiting room, a transition place between worlds. Arriving at the hospital did nothing to sober me up. In fact, it took the better part of a week for me to return to my typical waking consciousness. The doctors forced me to drink a disgusting activated charcoal concoction, which must have been a complete waste since it had been hours since I had eaten the Datura seeds. They pumped me full of sedatives, antipsychotics, and other drugs to relieve my severe urinary retention and tachycardia. They also inserted a catheter, which was as horrifying as you would expect while under the influence of Datura. I won't even describe that horror here, and will instead leave it to your imagination. Under sedation, my delirium continued, and I phased in and out of waking consciousness with varying levels of lucidity. At some point, my parents arrived home from their vacation and had to return to their son seemingly on the brink of death, lying insane in a hospital bed. I will never forgive myself for putting them through that stress and all of the trouble I caused from this stupid decision. In my sedated delirium, intense hallucinations continued as I fought for my sanity. A black Labrador came in and out of my hospital room, and the jingling of his collar would trigger waves of visions and views through poison kaleidoscopes behind my closed eyes. I could see him trotting through the hospital and his tail wagging back and forth as he passed the rooms full of suffering mankind. Any room he lingered on was an ill omen of that person's approaching death. I had the impression that Anthony was with me during this part of the trip. He was no longer acting as a guardian spirit like he was in the ambulance, but instead was by my bedside, or in the hospital bed next to mine, or standing out in the hallway on the threshold of the room. It wasn't until later that I learned that Anthony had been hospitalized as well earlier in the night. After Anthony was dropped off at home, it wasn't long before he started hallucinating and acting strangely. His mom caught him talking to imaginary people in their kitchen, wildly gesticulating and saying things that didn't make any sense. Anthony later said that he thought he was being interrogated by federal agents about his involvement in the local drug trade. Anthony was a low-level weed dealer at our high school and was always very paranoid about being caught. When confronted by his mom as to who he was talking to, he panicked and tried to run out of the house. She caught up to him fumbling with the lock on the front door, and when she tried to restrain him and calm him down, he turned around and punched her square in the face, thinking that she was one of the agents trying to arrest him. After that, the actual police were called, and Anthony was restrained and transported to the same hospital I would be admitted to several hours later. After our stay in the hospital and return to relative normalcy, Anthony and I were both sent to a psychiatric ward on a 72-hour involuntary hold. It took almost a week for me to feel normal again. I thought my eyes were never going to heal, and I worried that I'd given myself permanent psychosis. In the days that followed, I saw gnomes marching across the floor in the psych ward like little ants. I would stare at them for minutes, observing them closely, then briefly look away, and when I looked back, they had vanished. Small hallucinations like that and tricks played in my peripheral vision continued far longer than I ever wanted. This experience placed a permanent strain on my relationship with Anthony and my parents. I felt I had let everyone down with this stupid decision and ruined our lives. I remember standing under the hot water in the shower, staring down into the drain and feeling the water flow over my skin like rubber and thinking that things were never going to be normal again. This experience was 4 years ago now, in April of 2019, and things did eventually turn out alright. With time, my vision and mind repaired themselves and my parents forgave me. In August of that year, both Anthony and I went off to different colleges and have since lost touch. I thank God that no one was seriously injured or killed. After the fact, I learned from my parents that the police had never been called to our house and that instead multiple people in the area had called because I was making so much noise during my frantic flight from the demons in the middle of the night. Taking Datura rips apart the fabric of our consensus reality and exposes the tripper to the spirit realm, but what you find there is not at all pleasant or harmless, especially if you are as unprepared and naive as I was. It is much more a glimpse of hell than of heaven, and I now feel that I have permanently opened a door that cannot be shut in this lifetime. I frequently dream about this ordeal and have flashbacks to the visions I experienced that night. I still feel that woman standing in the darkness, observing my life from a distance and occasionally showing herself in my dreams to this day. I met Scotty in 1986 at a bar that my roommate worked at. He would always come in with his friend Steve and they would sit around and bullshit drinking Crown Royale. Anyhow, they were both very nice and polite, likable kind of guys. Scotty would sometimes come in by himself and he always looked so down. Later I found out it was because he was very lonely. One time he asked me out to dinner with no strings attached as he put it, but I was in a relationship at the time and had to decline his kind offer. One day in September of 1987, I was at the bar and Scotty was there too, and I wasn't very happy in my relationship because of abuse, and I ended up going over to Scott's house to drink and do crank. We partied and talked and drank. We talked about all kinds of things, including my unhappy relationship. He offered me a place to stay if I needed one, and again, we talked and drank some more, and then he finally told me that he had to lay it down and try to get some rest because he had to go to work in a few hours. He welcomed me to stay and sleep on his couch or in his bed, so I decided I would stay the night there. He offered me one of his t-shirts to sleep in and I began undressing in front of him. He hid his face and pointed towards the bathroom and said, "You can go in there and change." I chuckled to myself and thought, what a country bumpkin, but his innocent-like ways were cute. Anyhow, I ended up laying in his bed and a couple months later I realized I was pregnant with his baby. Scotty and I began our life together. He was so happy to have me there with him. My daughter that was 10 was also there with us for a bit, and he was just great with her. He seemed like such a great guy, and he really was, you know, but drugs had a hold of him, and me too at the time. I carried our daughter to term and partied in the manner of beer and a couple match heads of coke in the first 3 months of pregnancy. Then I quit and stayed clean and sober during the rest of it, and of course, Scotty partied like usual. I gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl and did the party thing all over again after she was born. With the new baby, I couldn't run free like I used to, and I got left at home while Scott would go to the bar and do his thing. Sometimes Scotty and I would go out to the bars and party together, and later down the road I would get pregnant and quit. He would continue throughout my pregnancy though. I would lay awake worrying about where he was and if he was okay, if he was dead or alive. I called the bars, his friends, the hospital, jail, all those things hunting him down, and eventually he would wander in drunk sometime in the morning. I cried, yelled, screamed, tried to talk to him, reason with him, guilt trip him, you name it, I did it, trying to make him clean up his act. He would feel bad and say he was going to clean up, but hey, we all know the scene. I got pregnant a second time and found out that I was having a boy and could hardly wait to tell Scott. I rushed home to tell him, and on the way back, I saw his truck sitting out in front of a friend's house, friend and dealer. I stopped and went in, only to find him there pawning one of his carpenter saws for a quarter bag of crank. I was mad and split. He came home shortly afterwards and hung his head in shame as usual with all the "I'm sorry I've let you down again" speeches. Anyways, I gave birth to our son. On the day I was being discharged from the hospital, after I had already checked out, I waited for 2 hours for Scott to come and pick me up and his new baby. When he did arrive, he was so amped up it was embarrassing. He was sweating and talking so fast. I was mad and hurt and thought, how could he be late picking me and his son up from the hospital? I yelled at him all the way home. He gave me some story about being out riding his motorcycle with some other guy, and the guy got pulled over, and of course, good old Scotty had to ride off a bit and pull in somewhere to keep an eye out for his buddy. The guy went to jail and Scotty went up to some chick at the gas station who had a truck and asked her to help him get his friend's bike. Oddly enough, they knew each other from the bar and so she helped him. I always wondered how true that story was, especially down the road when we were at the bar together and I saw him in a corner arguing with her about something. Looked like a lover's quarrel to me. The night we got home with our son, Scotty took off to the bar because he was mad that I bitched him out. I just sat home and cried. Finally, I called the bar and was told he wasn't there, but I told the bartender that if he saw him to please tell him I was sorry and that I loved him and wanted him to come home. That was what our relationship was like. He would drink and use and I would yell and scream and accuse him of being on dope, and then he would lie. I would find his bag and bust him. He would get pissed and leave or feel guilty and apologize. It was like a vicious circle. This is the dance we did. He would leave. I would hunt him down via phone or with my car. We would fight, make love, make up, and do it all over again. I ended up going out and buying my own quarter bag because I thought, screw it, if you can't beat him, join him. But really, all I wanted Scotty to do was accept me, and if that meant I had to use for him to like me again, then I would do it, and I did. We continued to fight and he continued to run. I chased and sometimes I did my own running and he chased. That was fun for me to have him come after me for a change. We ended up moving out of our old neighborhood to a whole new city, hoping that we could get away from the drugs. Scotty had lost jobs and was taking whatever he could get. We hoped our move would bring us a new future, and it kinda did for about a month. Scotty stayed home with me and we were both clean. We laughed and had fun. He was really great to be around, and I got pregnant again. One day, Scotty left to look for work. I puttered around the house doing the Susie homemaker thing. It got later and later in the day with no sign of Scotty. I started worrying about him, wondering if he'd been in an accident, calling the hospitals and jails, calling some of the local bars. Then that dread set in. The thoughts of him using again filled my mind, but I wouldn't let them take root. There's just no way he would do that, I thought to myself. Hours later, he wandered in with some story about running out of gas and some guy that was right on helping him out. Of course, the guy just happened to be a crank dealer and blah 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 blah. But I didn't get any dope and I'm not gonna use, I promise, he said. Day after day, night after night, Scott's addiction took him further and further away again. I wasn't sure I wanted to have this baby and do this all over again, but I just couldn't go through with an abortion. I was pregnant again for the third time with Scott's baby. Scott began hanging out at his new friend's house a lot and he had become mean in his actions towards me. One day he was outside being a jerk and I was going to our door just so I didn't have to listen to his mouth spewing out obscenities towards me. I shut the screen door and was about to begin to close the glass doors when out of nowhere, Scotty thrust a knife through the screen, just barely stopping before making contact with my pregnant belly. I continued shutting the door and he went around front and broke through it, tearing it off the hinges and everything. We constantly fought and I constantly felt like if I was only a better person or if I only didn't do this or did that, then maybe he would love me and stop using. Once again, we decided to move. I must say I was relieved to leave that place. I was all for moving. We were moving to the San Fernando Valley in LA County. We're going to stay with some friends for a bit until we got back on our feet. Scotty was mellow there, but still did his thing. We got our own place and things remained the same for me, wondering where he was and what he was doing. He drank and did his dope, but he seemed less out of control as before. I had a friend that lived in Oregon and would talk to her on a regular basis. We decided to move there and try to start a new life. My mom sent me some money to help us move. Things were fun on the way there until our car burnt to the ground. My friend had to come and get us. We stayed at her place and things were okay, but I was not happy there either. Scotty was drinking, but I didn't notice much crank use. But of course, I was taking care of 3 babies, now all in diapers. I was focused on them. We ended up moving back to California a month later and staying in his brother's wife's house. His brother was in jail for what else? Drugs. Anyway, we stayed there and found a place to move to, and just like before, it started all over again. This time though, I went out drinking with Scotty, and when we came home, I was so drunk, I hugged the toilet all night. The next day I was thinking about things and realized that I didn't remember if I paid our babysitter or not. As a matter of fact, I don't even remember coming home. I thought to myself, what if I had dropped my baby? Would I have remembered to call 911? And that's when I knew things had to change, at least where I was concerned. Scotty remained true to his addictions and I was miserable. He would drink and come home drunk, yelling and screaming at me, calling me all kinds of names. I hated it. I thought to myself, if he calls me a fucking bitch one more time, I'm going to scream. I was so sick of my life and all the misery scotch drinking and drugs were causing. I thought I am so unhappy and have been unhappy for as long as I can remember. I thought, I'm just going to kill myself. Yeah, that's it, I'll kill myself. I've tried drugs, I've tried alcohol, I've tried men, I've tried everything and nothing works. Now there is nothing left but death. Then something said, have you tried God yet? Until you've tried God, you haven't tried everything. I prayed right then and there. I said, God, I don't want to drink anymore. I don't want to use drugs anymore. I don't even want to smoke anymore. 3 days later, it occurred to me that I hadn't done any of my old habits, and I realized that not only had I not practiced any old habits, but I didn't even have the desire to. That was the beginning of the end of my drug days for the next 4 years, and at that moment I thought to myself, there must be something to this God thing. I could never quit on my own before, but when I prayed it worked for me. It was a true miracle. I began going to church. I wanted Scotty to come, but he preferred the bars and his dope. I took the kids and attended church. He hung out with his buddies and did drugs. I told him that we needed to live in separate places and that I wanted him to move. He wasn't happy with me, but he pretended like he would honor what I said and left to go to work on his van so that when he moved out he could leave me the car. Well, that day I got a phone call from Scott's friend. Scotty had propped his van up on one side, resting it on a couch, and the other side was jacked up. It was a windy day and the wind blew the propped up side and dropped on Scott while he was under the van, and he was rushed to the hospital. Some friends from church came over and took my kids so that I could leave to be with Scott. I got to the hospital and the doctors told me that they doubted that he would live, and if he did live, they said he would have brain damage. I went to see him and he was hooked up to tubes and monitors and all sorts of things. He was in a coma, and later the nurses told me that they didn't think he would make it through the night. Scotty had no broken bones but had punctured a lung. The big worry was that he had been under the van for about 4 minutes with little to no oxygen. Well, time went by and Scotty came out of the coma but couldn't move his right arm. As time went on, he healed completely and was back to his old self before you knew it. I thought for sure he would have this new outlook on life since his life had been spared, but no, he didn't even remember the accident. I still had him move out and he went to stay with his brother that had gotten out of prison, again. I continued on in church and he continued to worship his god, meth and alcohol. One day he came to me and said he wanted to be clean and sober and start going to church. We were married a few days later. I was so happy that he was clean and he did real good for a while, but he fell here and there. Before our first anniversary, he was already back into his dope world. I'd come home from church and there would be all these stupid people out front, all druggies of course. While Scotty was clean and going to church, we had some really nice times. He could be so wonderful when he was clean. I loved him dearly. I kept thinking he would come to his senses and stop doing dope again, but no such luck. It got worse. I'd find evidence of his drug use and confront him only to have him lie about it. Our first anniversary rolled around and he was so proud to take me to Pismo Beach and rent me a Lexus. It was great, except he just wasn't present. He tried to be, but he just couldn't fake it, and I could tell he really wanted to make me happy and be clean, but if he did that, he wouldn't be happy. So from that point on, Scotty lived the way he wanted to. I left Scotty November 14th of 1994. I hope it would be a wake-up call for him, like a big smack in the head, but it wasn't. He spiraled down even further. I would go see him from time to time or have him over for dinner. He usually didn't eat. I was having a hard time letting completely go of him. He would come to me every now and then and tell me that he needed help, and I would try to help him. He went in and out of drug rehab, Christian men's homes, but always returned to drugs. I tried to help him as much as I could by taking him to meetings and being supportive, but I got burnt out. The final straw for me was when he stayed with me under the condition that he would go to the VA for outpatient rehab. I would take him to the meetings and things. He went and seemed like he was doing okay, until one day I was in financial need and was going to the swap meet to sell some things to pay a bill. He said he had some things he needed to sell too, so he came along with me. I made a little money and he also made a nice amount. That evening he had a meeting. I drove him there, dropped him off, and didn't see him for a couple of days. He had taken his money and spent it on dope. That was it. I was done. Don't get me wrong, I let him come visit his kids and me, but I kept my distance. He was staying with some friends and I would get phone calls from people saying that he had ripped them off and that they found needles around the place he was staying. I didn't believe them because I hadn't seen that side of Scotty. I knew that in his past he had used needles, but I didn't think he did when he was with me. There was a time or two that he came to visit and fell asleep on my couch, and I thought that there might have been needle marks on him, but I wasn't sure and I didn't want to ask to have him lie about it. And if the truth be known, I really didn't want to know. I do know that I watched a man go from being hardworking to a man that couldn't hold a job, and I watched a man that had a place to live begin to live under overpasses and down by lakes. One day, Scotty came to me and told me that he really wanted to help, and a friend of mine directed him to a place called the Lord's House. Scotty went and stayed there for a while. He got a job at the church and did quite well for a fairly good amount of time. He would come and visit for the holidays. He really was trying, but the hope he now held for a relationship with me was gone. I had lost all trust. Scotty moved out of the Lord's House but stayed in the same California city. I ended up moving to Maryland in 1998. Scotty called me up and said he wanted to come see his kids. I told him okay, but that he would have to stay in a motel because he couldn't stay with me. When he showed up, he had $5 to his name. I let him hang at my place for 2 nights, and then I took him to a place to talk to someone about rehab. I gave him $10 and dropped him off. On the way to this place, he was trying to tell me how much he had changed. Changed, I yelled. You haven't changed. Here I sit in this van driving you to another place so you can go into rehab. You haven't changed at all, Scott. What has changed is me, and this is the last time that I'm going to do this with you. I'm not the same woman I was in California, and you are not going to put me through this ever again, so you better get it right this time. Scott got into a rehab, but took off a few weeks later and went back to California. We would talk to him from time to time via telephone. He had always tried to tell me he was doing good, but I knew he was lying. I moved back to Oregon in June of 2001, and I hunted Scott down via telephone so that he would at least know where his kids were. At that time, Scott was traveling around with some carnival, but he did say that he would like for me to look up jobs for him and to help him find a Salvation Army out here to stay at, but I didn't. I honestly didn't want him to move here unless he could have come out here with enough money to find a place to live and really look for work on his own. I would get letters from Scott apologizing to me and the kids. He would always let me know he wished we could get back together, and I know Scotty loved me as best as he knew how, but I couldn't put myself or our kids through his drug addiction. He later ended up in coastal California and has lived there the past 3 years. We talked a few times and he sent the kids some money for their birthdays and Christmas. I don't know what he did for work there, but I do know that he used the homeless shelter as his address. He would write the kids, and our oldest daughter was going to school out in California, and he would go and visit her. I saw his effort there. He told me he wanted to see our other kids and get to know them, but I was really scared to let him. I was afraid he would hurt them with his drug use. They had been hurt enough. I had always been honest with them about his drug use and never tried to cover it up. I figured it was better to know that Daddy was a drug addict, and that is what kept Daddy from being around rather than chance them thinking Daddy didn't love them. I talked to Scotty about a year ago. I was distant. I had to be. I wasn't about to let him in ever again. Our older daughter told me that he had gone to see her in June of 2004, and he kept leaving and going to the bar. He was hanging out with old friends that use. A mutual friend said that he was sweating and acting like a wild man, drinking one beer after another. He was with his brother who had just gotten out of prison yet again for drugs. My daughter was upset with her dad because he was supposed to be helping her move to Colorado. He was to drive the U-Haul, but she didn't feel safe with him acting like he was. A friend confronted him on his behavior and he did the typical and was insulted. He said he resented being accused of being on drugs. He told them that they could figure out how to get to Colorado themselves and left. In November of 2004, I had tried to contact Scotty regarding the kids, but he did not answer his cell phone. I called and left message after message with nothing in return. That was very odd for Scott, because one thing he'd been trying to do was call back if it was one of the kids or about one of them. On February 9th, 2005, I got a phone call from her oldest daughter that lives in Colorado. I picked up the phone and said, "Hello? Mom? Yes? Dad died." I will never forget those words. Scotty died on October 16th of 2004 due to complications from drug use. He had been shooting up, and as a result he got a bacterial infection, cellulitis, which he probably thought was just an abscess. He more than likely tried to treat it himself, and when he realized that he couldn't and it was getting worse, he then went to the hospital, but he had waited too long because it had turned into staph and necrotizing fasciitis. He lived for 7 days until his body went into septic shock and he had a cardiac arrest and died. I just found this out February 9th of 2005. Scotty had listed himself as single, therefore they didn't try to find his wife to tell her or his kids. He died being labeled a transient with no kin. Instead of celebrating his 48th birthday, Scott was being cremated. I spoke with the coroner and sheriff, and they told me that a man named John took Scott to the hospital, and after Scott passed away, John tried to say that he was Scott's brother and claim his personal belongings. When asked for ID, John then said, "Well, I was like a brother. What a vulture." The very people that paraded around as his friends were the first to try and rip him off. I was angered by this to no end. You know, when we use, we think, what's the big deal? I'm not hurting no one. That is not the truth, because people are being hurt by your drug use. Everyone who loves you is being hurt by it. Just ask Scotty's kids. They've suffered the ultimate pain. Their dad is dead because of his choice to use. If you are reading this and you are using drugs, it doesn't matter what kind of drugs or how you use them. Please get help. There is hope for you. Remember this, as long as there is breath, there is hope. I drank a fairly average amount during high school and my first 2 years of college. I didn't like to party, but I did love getting drunk with friends. I'm a husky guy, can handle a lot of liquor at once, but I never exhibited any problem behavior. That all changed very quickly. The summer of 2017, right before I moved back to Arkansas for my 3rd year of college, my parents got divorced. In the fall, my dad got a debilitating brain infection and I dropped out of school to move home and be closer to my family. I moved in with my girlfriend of 4 years, who then broke up with me and kicked me out a month later. So there I was, a broken-hearted 20-year-old guy with a newly shattered family, back in my shitty hometown. So I started drinking, hard. I had a fake ID that I rarely used back in college. I was too scared to try it at bars or liquor stores, but in my hometown they sold hard liquor at grocery stores, so I started buying bottles of cheap whiskey that I chug every night to numb the pain. In the spring, my dad was doing better, so I went back to school and moved back in with my friends. I turned 21 soon after that, and all bets were off. I drank like a cartoon character for the next 2 whole years, almost comical amounts of alcohol. My friends and I were embracing the college burnout lifestyle, especially in the summer when it wasn't uncommon for each of us to put away a bottle of whiskey and a 6-pack every day. Eventually, my friends started to grow up and clean up their act, but I didn't. I knew I wasn't going to finish school. My family had no money left. I got a job as a kitchen manager at a pizza place / craft brewery, so free pizza and beer every night caused me to really start packing on the pounds. In late 2019, my dad had a really bad stroke due to lasting complications from his brain infection. I decided to move back home once again, this time taking my new girlfriend with me. We ended up living with my mom and her new boyfriend. Soon afterwards, COVID hit. This is when my drinking got really bad because I had to hide it. I went from being a free adult drinking whenever I wanted to being back under my mommy's roof. Her and my girlfriend could both tell I had a problem, so they began watching me more closely, which resulted in more private trips to the gas station to buy Gatorade, which really meant 4 or 5 airplane shots and a Gatorade to cover up my breath. This continued until I started to notice negative physical effects. I started getting sick to my stomach all the time, and throwing up became an almost daily occurrence. In August 2020, I was helping my mom do a landscaping gig at a bar, and I got caught on camera stealing liquor from behind the bar when I would go inside for breaks. After this, I went to rehab for the first time. I was there for 3 weeks, 1 in detox and 2 in the chemical dependency unit. They put me on all kinds of mood stabilizers, which I didn't need, and stopped taking once I got out, but they did put me on Seroquel, which was a saving grace at the time, but later turned out to be a huge mistake. I had always had sleeping problems, which was part of the reason I drank so heavily at night. What I didn't know was that Seroquel is dangerously addictive. Anyway, I stayed clean for about 2 months before my girlfriend broke up with me, and I relapsed immediately. It was bad for a few weeks, but eventually I got to a point where I was drinking like a regular human being again. Definitely still excessive, but it wasn't all day every day. I could go out somewhere, have 4 drinks and be satisfied. It was definitely progress. In the next few months, I got over my last ex very quickly and started dating an old friend that I'm miraculously still with today. A few months into our relationship, she announces that she accepted a job in Austin, Texas, and that she'd be moving there in May. I agreed to move with her, but decided to wait until August so I could stay at my job and save money. Big mistake. The moment she left, the stress drinking came back in full force and completely took over my life. It was back to all day, every day. I was a pizza delivery driver at this point, and I was essentially getting paid to drink and drive. I got into 3 separate accidents on the job. Only one of them involved another car, but it totaled mine. It still blows my mind that I didn't hurt anyone or myself. My car was always overflowing with empty shooter bottles and tall boys. During this time, my anxiety got so bad that I convinced my psychiatrist to prescribe me Klonopin. I was never into taking benzos to get high. I just felt like at this point I needed the real deal to help calm my constant nerves. This ultimately made things worse, as I was now on 2 extremely addictive medications that, coupled with my alcoholism, made for some seriously dark withdrawal episodes. By the end of the summer, I had been hospitalized twice for dehydration, vitamin deficiencies, and low kidney and liver function. The second time, they did an endoscopy and found several ulcers in my esophagus and a yeast infection at the entrance to my stomach. They had me detox for a few days, gave me a bunch of meds for the ulcers and infection, and told me I had to quit drinking. Obviously, I never took the meds and went out drinking the night they discharged me. When I moved to Austin, I knew I had to get things under control, and I did for a couple months. Then my dad had yet another stroke. I couldn't move back home again. I had practically just gotten here. So there I was, living in a brand new city and knowing that my dad was back in the hospital 14 hours away. I gave up. I started drinking in a more savage, pathetic manner than I ever had. My girlfriend thought I had quit drinking after the second hospitalization, so I had to hide everything from her. Eventually, she knew what was going on, but we never spoke about it. I got sicker and sicker, rapidly. The main problem was my stomach. I was always so nauseous that I could never stomach most foods. I could also no longer stomach most hard liquor, so I was reduced to constantly chugging the strongest and cheapest malt liquor I could find, flavored Steel Reserve or Four Loko, supplemented with Fireball and hard seltzers. By December 2021, I had the same daily routine. I would wake up at 5 a.m., shake and sweat profusely until 7 a.m., when places started selling alcohol, when I would go to the gas station. I would get 3 tall boys and sit in the parking lot, alternating between drinking them and throwing them back up for about an hour. I would then go home, try and then fail to go back to sleep, then repeat this process one more time. When it was time to go to work, I would buy a 10-pack of Fireball shots and a 6-pack of White Claws to hide in my backpack and drink in the bathroom throughout the night. I would usually have to excuse myself to throw up 10 times per shift as well, meaning I was damn near useless on the job. I would get a few more tall boys on the way home, which I would drink and then throw back up. Then I would lay in bed in agony until I finally fell asleep for an hour or two, then started all over again. I had completely given up on water, and I had mostly given up on food. At one point, I didn't even attempt to eat for 4 days. I couldn't even get drunk anymore because I could barely digest the alcohol, so I was in a state of constant withdrawal. My anxiety and sleeping meds stopped working entirely, but my symptoms would get a million times worse when I ran out of them. My heart rate was always at around 120, and I was just waiting for that heart attack to come. Because I wasn't getting any food or water, just malt liquor and Fireball, the only nutrient my body was getting was sugar, so my shit and piss smelled like rotting fruit. I was completely malnourished, but I had swelled up to 265 pounds and was practically unrecognizable to people who had known me just 2 years prior. Every night I got stuck in hypnagogia, the state between awake and asleep, and it turned my nights into a hellish whirlwind of altered reality and stressful half-dreams. At one point I had a vivid sleep paralysis episode where I could hear my girlfriend having sex with another guy in our living room, but I couldn't move or scream to do anything about it. At that point I wouldn't have been surprised or even mad if she was cheating, because I turned into a complete shell of my former self and a nightmare to live with. I finally realized that there was a 0% chance of me being able to pull myself out of this, so I checked into rehab for the second time. I have now been clean from alcohol and benzos for 1.5 years, and I now take trazodone for my sleep problems instead of Seroquel. My life is 1,000,000 times better, my relationship is 1,000,000 times happier, but I'm still stricken with anxiety about the damage I've done to my body. It took me a long time to realize that I had a severe eating disorder on top of my addiction, and all that puking has left me with near permanent heartburn, not just acid reflux, the kind that makes you go to the ER because you think you're finally having that heart attack before they explain to you that your esophagus is just in really bad shape. I also now have extreme anxiety towards driving and can't really drive for more than 45 minutes without starting to dissociate then panic. I am so thankful for my health and the fact that I somehow didn't completely destroy my liver, but knowing the amount of damage I've done to my body has left me with a permanently paranoid outlook on life. Reddit is supposed to be a fun place to scroll looking for memes, funny videos, or interesting things you've never seen before. Sometimes, though, Reddit can have a really sad reality to it. If you frequent certain Reddit communities, you might notice regulars who post quite a bit. But what happens when one day that Redditor just stops posting? Now, there could be plenty of reasons for that happening, but the most depressing reason is that the user passed away. It's even more sad to see the posts and comments they left in different subreddits leading up to their untimely death, knowing that their time has come. In this video, I'm going to talk about a very heartbreaking case of a 21-year-old Redditor who documented her phenibut addiction until she stopped posting and unfortunately died. The woman in today's video goes by the name Mornay Rainier Schoner. Her very kind sister has been very grateful to helping out with this video, telling me information that probably only a few people know. Before I begin, I just want to thank her for lending her knowledge on this and giving me as much info as she did. She wants this video made to maybe help people who are going down the same path and try to fix their problems before something like this happens to them. This will be dedicated to Mornay and her family. Like I said before, Mornay was 21 at the time of her death, a very young age as that was only 2, almost 3 years removed from my age currently. It's very sad to think that life is so precious and it can be gone in an instant over a need or want to satisfy our minds. A little background info to understand a little bit more about Mornay. She lived in Washington State. She struggled with mental health issues most of her life, since middle school. She was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, but her sister and mom both thought she also had bipolar disorder as well. It might be autism, as her sister found out she was diagnosed with it recently, and she thinks that could be it. Mornay's childhood was not the best as she grew up in a household where her father was very emotionally and verbally abusive. Mornay was specifically abused more than her sister, and it caused her a lot of distress. Her mom left her dad in 2015-2016, and many things ensued with court proceedings and such, which caused her a lot of problems on top of what she already had. This is when she started taking phenibut for her social anxiety, as it was very severe and she also needed a job. Her sister recalls that Mornay said she felt amazing at the beginning of the phenibut use. She could talk to people like normal and felt happy, but we all know with addiction that doesn't last. Her sister also says she was taking kratom, smoked weed regularly, and vaped, and also dabbled with other drugs as well. This is a comment she left on a Reddit post talking about her anxiety. I have severe social anxiety and work retail in a very small but busy store where I am one of the only 1 or 2 associates working at a time, so it gets really busy and overwhelming and has caused me panic attacks on more than one occasion. I need to get another job, but I just can't right now for unrelated reasons. Mushrooms are really hard for me to find, but I've been lucky to get them a few times. I would microdose them before work and felt myself 100% more able to talk and hold conversations with customers and coworkers without stumbling over my words and getting overwhelmed. It felt so freeing in a way I can't really explain. The only way I can really describe it is as a relaxing stimulant, not so much psychedelic. I would absolutely recommend that you try it. As you can see, her anxiety was the main reason why she was trying to find solace in drugs, because they would temporarily make her feel better. I am personally a believer in microdosing shrooms, as it has proven to help people with their mental health. I think maybe if she could have gotten her hands on it more, then she would still be alive today, which is really sad to think about. This is another comment that lets you in on what she was thinking at the time. My psychiatrist said the same thing, told me if I really had ADHD, my mom would have had me diagnosed with it as a kid. This woman also forced me to go cold turkey off Effexor that I'd been on for 4 years, despite me begging to be tapered, which sent me to the hospital for a week for unbearable withdrawals. I'm currently on the same dead-end quest of desperately trying to get help and find a doctor that actually takes my insurance that might believe me. I've taken every antidepressant that exists, and I've been in psychiatry and therapy for my depression and anxiety for 12 years, and nothing has helped me. Wouldn't you think that if you've tried 12 years of being treated for something and none of the treatments are helping, that maybe it could be something else? Doctors are dumb. She mentions Effexor, and I've done a video on this antidepressant in the past, and I've pretty much come to the conclusion that it is probably the worst one to be taking as the withdrawals are horrible from it. The withdrawal from Effexor wasn't the worst possible one she could have, as Phenibut's was even worse. She said when she stopped taking it, she felt horrible, worse than any medication withdrawal she had ever been through. If the withdrawals weren't bad enough, she also went through psychosis from Phenibut. She would not be able to sleep for days straight, and when she did sleep, she would have horrible vivid nightmares and also terrifying hallucinations. This is another experience she had with Effexor plus Klonopin. I was prescribed 14.5 milligrams of Klonopin, once in the morning and once at night. The only thing I was told is not to sell my medication. In addition, fast forward a few years and I've been on high-dose Effexor for 3 years. My doctor wanted me off of it, and I begged her to taper me as I got horrible withdrawals, even if I missed taking it at the same time every day. She said, "You're just gonna have to deal with it, it'll get better after a while." I was in the hospital on and off for 2 weeks because I was having panic attacks and other scary symptoms, and I have cyclic vomiting syndrome, which is triggered for me by anxiety. I couldn't eat for weeks, lost a whole bunch of weight, and took months rebuilding my mental state. In the last 6 months, I was in the emergency room for a panic attack. They gave me a ton of IV Ativan, can't remember dosages, and IV Benadryl, overdosed me on both to the point where I was hallucinating from the Benadryl, moving my body like crazy from the most intense restless legs I've ever felt in my life. When they discharged me and told me I was free to go, they knew I drove myself there and didn't have family with me. I was in a very odd state of mind, and my emergency room is 3 minutes away from my house. I drove myself home, hallucinated things running across the road less than a street down from my house, blacked out and woke up head-on and crashed into a parked car. Turns out, somehow I was facing the complete opposite direction from which I came, ran through my neighbor's yard, nicked their house somehow, and crashed. I was charged with a DUI when the cops got there. I can't help but think of how troubled her life was at this point. We really take our lives for granted when people like Mornay are suffering daily like this. I personally have anxiety and depression, but it is not nearly this bad, and I'm very thankful for that after learning about this girl. This next part is when she started to build interest in taking baclofen to get off Phenibut, as she researched on Reddit that it can help. I'm at 8 to 10 grams per day of Phenibut for the past 4 months and would like to make the switch right over to baclofen. I really don't want to be on Phenibut for any longer. I have a high-stress job where I need to be at 100% every day, so I am having a lot of anxiety over making the switch. I will soon have helper meds to ease other discomfort, but I do have a few questions, however. You can pause the video and read these questions if you'd like, but I'm going to move on. Here's a continuation to the previous post. I've been taking around 8 to 10 grams per day the past month or so. Before that was hovering around 3 to 5 for 3 months. The past couple weeks I noticed my face swelling, didn't connect it to the Phenibut until just yesterday when it finally went away, and then I dosed again and it came back. Horribly dry mouth, nose, and lips. Horrible cramping around my leg and ankle, and even worse, a tremor. I pee out all of the water I drink almost right away. I'm not sure what's going on. I feel like absolute shit. I want to lower my dose, but I'm afraid of what that will bring as well. Fuck, I wish I could just cold turkey this shit. I am so fucking scared. I don't know what to do. I have baclofen and Atizolam on the way, but it won't be here for another week or so. The swelling scares the fuck out of me. It feels like an allergic reaction. It's like my body decided it doesn't like Phenibut anymore. Just some real tragic stuff here. Personally, I've done Phenibut a lot and never got addicted or anything, but that doesn't mean you won't. Our bodies are all different and we all have different compulsions. This was Mornay's first experience with baclofen, and her sister said she got it from a website but doesn't know which one, so that means she wasn't prescribed this. In this post, she already messed up the dosage, which I think ended up screwing her down the road. So basically, I wasn't sure how to deal with this. I started out taking 70 milligrams of baclofen 3 times a day. Fucking idiot, I know, please don't judge me. And within a day, I realized I was suffering a massive overdose and probably could have died. Then, thanks to a very good and caring friend, I realized you're supposed to split your dose, so I've been doing 20 milligrams 4 times a day. Haven't been having any bad symptoms except the shakes. Don't know if that's normal from withdrawal or from too much baclofen. I'm just guessing with it at this point. Kratom doesn't work at all for me anymore, daily user, no matter how much I take. I don't even know if I would suffer withdrawals from not taking it at this point. Nicotine does nothing. I have a high tolerance to benzos, but even those weren't doing anything. I have also been taking lemon balm and ashwagandha and melatonin as needed for sleep. I've been sleeping pretty good, no nightmares or any real withdrawal symptoms to speak of, so that's good. I don't feel horrible on the 3rd day like I thought I was going to. So we learn here that she is actually a daily kratom user and it does not affect her. Also, the benzos weren't doing anything either, and that's saying something because benzos are very, very strong. These posts are slowly getting more and more messed up as she continues her baclofen use. I really wish she had never bought this stuff, as it was probably a catalyst for what happened later. I'm now on day 5 and the side effects of too much baclofen are starting to be too much. One of my thumbs is numb. Yup, only one. My ankles and knees hurt again like how they did on Phenibut. I am horribly constipated and nothing is helping. But the worst have been the nights. The nights are so bad. I wake up every hour or 45 minutes. I use melatonin to help sleep and magnesium and lemon balm and everything, and it doesn't help. I have horribly vivid nightmares. I've woken up crying and whimpering on 2 occasions. It takes me a minute to realize that my dreams weren't real. I don't know how much more I should reduce by. Things can't get much worse and I'm feeling awful without sleep and my anxiety is getting worse as well. I was really happy and optimistic for a few days. This sucks. Now, this next post was her last one on Reddit, as a week later she unfortunately passed away. This is an experience her sister told me about and what Mornay has posted on Reddit. I'm going to read what she posted since it came directly from her. I switched at 7 grams of Phenibut and 70 milligrams baclofen. It actually was a miracle at first. I went without withdrawals from Phenibut completely. Around day 5, I'd started to develop a tremor, not anxiety or anything, but I knew this could be a side effect of the baclofen or just the Phenibut withdrawals still working their way through. I also started developing muscle twitches, extreme irritating and painful ankle pain, similar as to how it was when I was taking too much Phenibut. I decided that maybe the baclofen was just too much, so I dropped 10 milligrams right away to 60 milligrams. However, this did not get rid of any of the symptoms. As the days went by, my insomnia got so bad that I'd slept maybe an hour in 5 days, and horrific nightmares every time I would sleep. Here come the new symptoms, even with my lowered dose. Numbness in my thumb, painful knees, and a painful twinge in my left foot, which caused one of my toes to very painfully twitch constantly. At this point in time, I began to notice that these symptoms would somewhat subside, but as soon as I took my next dose, they would all immediately come back. For a week or so, I was desperate, dropping as fast as my body would allow, but even at lower doses, the symptoms didn't let up. Eventually, I gave up on the taper and went back to a more stable dose. I thought maybe I could convince my doctor to prescribe me a benzo to mega fast taper because I was concerned about what permanent damage could be done. And then this is where hell begins. About an hour after I missed one of my scheduled doses, I got this intense crawling headache on the right side of my head. I took my regular dose, but it didn't go away. The next day, the entire right side of my head was burning. The back of my head and spine felt like an open wound. My face would swell. My mom tried to convince me that it would pass, and to just keep fast tapering or go cold turkey. I'd found nothing online describing what I was experiencing, and I was having similar symptoms from the Phenibut itself, so I knew something was up. After dealing with these excruciating head sensations for a total of 3 days, on day 11 I had a seizure and fell down the stairs. An ambulance was called. I remember seeing them and getting in and everything, but after that I don't remember anything until I woke up again, a day later. Apparently I had gone into full-blown psychosis, talking to people that weren't there, screaming, laughing, barely remembering my family's names, and ripping out my IVs. They tried several different medications to sedate me, but the only thing that got me to sleep was Haldol. They told me that for my body weight, 60 milligrams was way too much, 4'11", 98 pounds, which likely could have been the cause. Everyone in my family has different theories. My mom thinks the baclofen just prolonged the withdrawal, but I am nearly certain it was from overdoing the baclofen. This was just an extremely intense experience of psychosis. I'm not here to say you can't do any of these drugs as they are not the worst drugs you could do. All I'm trying to get out of this is that you should just be safe. You never want to overdo something as that can really mess you up, or even kill you. The conclusion to this video is what happened during Mornay's overdose, told bravely by her sister. If you've made it this far, I'm sure you can handle this, but just in case, I'm warning you now if you are sensitive to this kind of material. This was about a week after the baclofen psychosis. I remember around 4 to 5 a.m., my grandma coming down to my mom's room to wake her up, telling her that my sister was having a hard time breathing. I put on a hoodie and some sweats, remember thinking, ugh, we're gonna have to go to the hospital again? By the time I made it upstairs, my grandma was on the phone with 911. My sister was laying on the floor unresponsive in her doorway with my mom giving her CPR. I took the phone from my grandma and had to continue the call. My grandma was so hysterical she was pretty much incoherent. We lived in a house that maps often got wrong, so I had to run outside down the road and flag down the ambulances. There were probably 3 ambulances, 2 fire trucks, and 2 to 3 cop cars in our little cul-de-sac by the time she passed. I stayed out in the front yard as the paramedics rushed inside. I didn't want to be in their way or be inside and have to see what was going on. I remember seeing the paramedics put the stretcher back into the ambulance without her in it, but for some reason it didn't register with me. My mom came outside sobbing, telling me she was gone. I didn't cry, I didn't say anything. I didn't cry that whole night. I guess I just knew I had to be there for my mom at that moment. I went back inside and sat at the dinner table. They asked us if we wanted to see her body. We said no. The autopsy took a long time, weeks. They concluded it was a cocktail of drugs that killed her, high levels of baclofen, Valium, laxatives, and weed. I'm sure there's more. I'm not exactly sure on everything she took that day, but it was just too much for her small body to handle, I guess. The cops tore apart her room, left it unrecognizable from how she had it before. They labeled her death as suspicious at first, I guess because she was so young? I don't know. I'd wondered at times if it was a suicide, but I know it wasn't. She would never do that. That was just really tough to get through, as having lost a family member myself, but this information is valuable to any person out there who is going down this path to maybe look at themselves and say, hold on, I need to slow down. I want to thank Mornay's sister, as I could not have gone in depth with this video like I did. I'm very thankful that she was able to recall the last moments of her sister's life and the events leading up to it, as it must have been very hard to look back on. Thank you to everyone who watches my videos constantly, and I hope this one sticks with you for a while, because videos like these are needed in harm reduction. Sometimes you need the harsh and true reality of life to help you make the right decisions down the road and don't end up overdosing or something tragic like that. This death could have been prevented, but it just wasn't because of her limited resources. That really sucks knowing that, as she could be prospering in life right now, maybe even teaching harm reduction to people and how she successfully got through a horrible addiction. But sadly, that is not the case. Anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and please, stay safe. This event happened a few months ago at the time of writing this. It is the report of the time where I nearly died from a bad pill and had numerous side effects for months afterward. This was one of the worst experiences of my life, yet very profound in its impacts now. Be careful when taking drugs. If you stay till the end, you'll see why I should have been far more careful. Backstory prior to the experience. This experience happened sometime in March 2017, just at the end of winter. I was a young kid at 15 years of age, new to substances that had psychoactive effects, yet I already had my mind set out on a mission to explore the limits of the realm of consciousness, the goal being to try DMT to challenge my nihilistic viewpoints of the entire world and concept of life. Ecstasy was meant to be a stepping stone to get there, and at the time would be only the second drug I had ever consumed, the first being weed, in which I had only started using the previous December, so the whole process was certainly rushed. Pre-consumption. Me and two friends, we'll call them M and L, were interested in trying MDMA and planned on taking some when me, them, and some other friends came around my house for the night. Finding the right dealer took a while, but my usual plug ended up telling me that he could sell me pills, but no powdered MDMA. I believed this to be fine, as prior to the experience, I had been treating the substances as the same during all my research of the substance. I ended up buying 2 pills, as it was all I could get, but my research was lacking, and I had no idea what to look out for in pills of E to check if it was all good, etc. Research was lacking in general. The pills were red bricks and were incredibly hard and tough to break apart. The day came, and we decided to first meet some friends at the park to smoke some dank and drink a lot of vodka. Me, M, L, and 2 other friends named J and F headed back to my house. But after J had stated some dangers of bad pills, M and L tapped out of taking some of the E. However, I believe the chance of a bad pill would still be very unlikely, and I needed to feel this insane happiness and take myself closer to curing my nihilistic view on life. Fuck it, I said, and decided I would take it anyway. The experience. At 1 a.m., I thought the alcohol was out of my system enough so that I could take the E and have it kick in after the alcohol would have had the potential to dehydrate me, a very rough and uncalculated assumption. Some people were starting to fall asleep due to the weed, and me and F were the only ones still moving about and agreed that I should go for it. Note, the following effects I believe are due to the pill being very bad and not actual MDMA, although I can never be certain. I first started with just a quarter of the pill, just to test for any bad reactions. After a half an hour, I took another quarter, barely containing my nerves and excitement. Nothing had happened yet. After an hour and a half passed, I was still feeling nothing, so I gobbled up the rest of the pill hoping I would actually feel something. Now, as soon as the pill was down my throat, it hit me like a freight train. I was sitting on my floor and was immediately swept away by the intensity, which I hear is uncommon on ecstasy for such a rapid come-up. There wasn't even a come-up really, just a very warm feeling in my neck, like electricity sparking through my spine for a few minutes before being catapulted from my normal mind state. As I sat on my floor, a concerned brief thought of, "Holy shit, this is only the first dose," entered my thoughts before being quickly swept away by the overwhelming sense of euphoria. I felt amazing, the most incredible feeling ever, barely able to move, expressions of intense pleasure stricken across my face. I have memories of about 2 minutes of my experience being this joyful before it goes hazy and then hellish. After a few minutes, I was passed out on my floor. The turning point. I awake on my floor, uncertain of the time that has passed, but I'm lying down with my headphones still on, not playing anything. F is falling asleep, assuming I had just been listening to music. I drift back into consciousness and open my eyes. 2 things then terrified me to a state of grief and worry I have never experienced again in my life. As I drift back in, there is a pain in my gut, a pain so grueling and intense and disgusting, I can barely recall it. A feeling like my intestines and gut were dissolving inside me. I look at F, and the whole room is shaking. Due to my poor research, I was unaware of the eye-twitching side effect. However, after discussing these eye shakes with others, they sound far more intense. These eye shakes started happening uncontrollably and so fast that it was impossible to make out anything in the room. I shake F's leg, and he wakes up, and I look at him with my eyes spazzing out like mad, all the way side to side 40 times a second for 10 seconds before a 1-second break. The eye shakes were happening side to side. However, for me, the whole world was moving up and down, which was slightly disturbing. This shit freaked me the fuck out, and F wakes up J, and they look at me discussing what to do. F is a great guy, but was laughing uncontrollably. J looked scared shitless. I watched them talk, yet couldn't hear a word spoken. The whole world had gone silent. Battling death. Here's where the trip gets weird, very weird. Without thinking, I crawled out onto my balcony, but what is odd is the fact I hadn't registered the last 2 minutes at all in my head. I had no idea about my eye shakes and couldn't register the gut pain. It was as if my body was reacting to the stimuli, causing me to be terrified, Yet my ego was so disassociated that I was unaware that anything was wrong, or perhaps I was just too euphoric still. Almost like primal instinct, I shoved my fist into my throat without a second's hesitation and throw up. That was the precise moment in which I snapped back to reality, realizing exactly what was going on and suddenly feeling a lot less fucked up. This was real. I was horrified, fully aware of the pain now, and aware that I was in serious danger of dying. I forced myself to throw up again. M is now awake. L won't wake up when F tries. My friends don't call an ambulance, being afraid of the situation and the fact that my mom was sleeping upstairs. I didn't think this would be happening. Jay runs into the kitchen and brings me an apple as a placebo, telling me it'll make it go away. I eat it, and it causes me to throw up more. Throwing up, mixed with the insane levels of adrenaline from realizing my own situation in the most surreal way imaginable, helps me hang on and fight. My friend keeps bringing me apples repeatedly, yet I only ever remember eating 2. They bring me orange juice, and I drink 2 liters of it, but only remember taking a gulp and deciding it didn't help. Due to the commotion, my mom comes down the stairs and out to the balcony. Unaware of what was going on, she screams at me to get inside and drags me through the doors as I stare up at her with eyes wider than I can physically force them to go, still shaking. As I stared up at her pulling me in, I realized she had no face at all. She looked exactly like Slender Man, her face melting off constantly. She leaves, and I look up to the wall of my living room. Across the whole wall is an image of a supply drop from the game Call of Duty Black Ops 3. They come and go across the wall, opening up as they do. However, instead of containing the usual cosmetics for the game, they are instead Snapchat stories from people I know at school. Each of them a black image captioned, "Pray for Josh," with an emoji of interlocking fingers, over and over and over again. I was convinced that these were entirely real, and people were posting this on Snapchat at 4 a.m., within minutes of me starting to die. I was so convinced that when I later checked Snapchat that night to find no one had posted it, I was confused beyond belief. And at that stage, I wasn't even as out of my mind anymore. But anyways, back to the story. I'm starting to feel like I'm not going to die anymore, and although still fucked up, my mental state felt pretty normal now due to the insane levels of adrenaline. My memory is missing parts, but now that it's 4, I'm pretty sure I'm going to live. My friends start trying to sleep. I'm forever grateful for them for what they did that night. I truly believe they saved my life by inducing the vomit with the apples, so the apple became a metaphor for my lifeline and my savior. I asked for them to stay up and talk to me to keep me grounded, but they have been for ages, so they tell me to chill out to my music. The soundtrack of hell. I put on my music and shuffled a playlist I had, and what I was about to hear was the darkest, most hellish thing imaginable, causing shivers down my spine whenever I heard the songs I listened to for months after the experience. I have since experienced ego death on acid, along with various other intense experiences using substances and without them. Yet this was by far the most intense, strange, and reality-bending experience I've ever had. The 3 songs I remember listening to were as follows: Doom, Crosshairs, and King Ghidorah, The Fine Print, and Mos Def, Auditorium. As I listened, I could recognize the song, yet the music sounded distorted and entirely different. The strangest bit, however, was the vocals. They came out clear enough for me to hear each word. However, the way they were strung together was so incredibly alien that none of the lines made any sense whatsoever, complete gibberish every second. I do not understand how this worked, but no matter what words I heard, there was no possible way I could have ever deemed it to make sense. It really felt like the whole world and my sense of reality had slipped away from me, and nothing could keep me grounded to a sense of what was real. The gibberish lines were so confusing and odd, yet the rapper sounded so natural in saying them that the cringe sent shivers across my body. What made it even stranger was the tone and rhythm of the words. It was all said in a monotone and monorhythmic way, the words coming out in the same pattern every line before the last syllable of each line was stretched out and given a pitch similar to that of someone saying, "Now," as a TV host. This tone caused some crazy closed-eye visuals, as I could constantly see a cartoon version of the rapper MF Doom standing on a stage in a quiz show moving his mouth to the words, before my perspective shifted to show the night sky and a giant balloon of an evil clown towering over the whole festival that the quiz show was at, over and over again. The second song talks about battling the rapper's enemies as if he were in medieval times, and the concept of a rap being about medieval times whilst not understanding that it was a metaphor was the most surreal thing ever and confused the shit out of me. The third song's chorus made it seem as though people were jumping around in my headphones talking right in my ear, left to right. It's impossible to fully describe, but the sheer weirdness of this music was ridiculous. Time passes and I'm feeling better. Elle has woken up and realizes what's happening due to me mopping up my sick on the balcony. He hugs me, and it allows me to feel my heartbeat racing at 150 beats per minute, even after hours have passed and I'm no longer feeling scared. I notice that I've been running my hand through my hair the whole time, pulling out hair from the front to relieve stress. It's impossible to sleep. My eyes are still naturally as wide as physically possible, and I'm not tired at all. I end up going on Snapchat and briefly put up a message on my story thanking JNF for saving me, before taking it down upon realizing it made no sense and I didn't want people to know of this experience. When I discover that Pray for Josh Snapchat stories aren't actually posted by anyone at all, I'm confused beyond belief. I wait out the remainder of the night, which actually passed pretty fast. In the morning, 2 friends from the night before came around for breakfast. As we're sitting in my front room talking to them about what happened, I repeatedly trail off, stare into the distance unknowingly, not thinking about anything, and pulling my hair. This was a tic that lasted for around 2 months after the experience. The morning actually has me feeling very happy and refreshed, unlike any sort of come down. This is probably due to the feeling of beating death. I managed to sleep later on. PTSD and complete insanity. If you have made it this far, thank you for your time. What I'll touch upon now is the after effects of the pill, which was deemed by a psychiatrist as likely to be PTSD, no diagnosis. It may be hard for me to recall every effect I had long term here, but I'll do my best. The first side effect that was apparent were certain tics that I had. I would constantly go blank in my mind and stare into the distance for around 2 minutes at a time, even if around other people. The experience was actually pushed from my mind relatively quickly, but due to the various flashbacks, I definitely hadn't gotten rid of it. I was just putting on a show where I tried to act normal. I wasn't normal. The concept of what ideas were sensible and realistic broke down completely. Within the first few days, I developed the belief that I was actually in a coma and needed to wake up. Every night when I fell asleep, I would hear people such as my family and friends talking to me, wishing me to get better, etc. Sometimes it felt so real that when I shut my eyes, it felt as though my mind was elevated upwards so far that I reached the real world briefly and could even see the people sitting beside my bed. I remember exactly where my hospital bed was. For some reason, it was in the same building as the county building responsible for parking permits, etc. I have no idea why, but I believed I was in a hospital bed there. The nystagmus or eye twitches stayed present for a few weeks after the experience. A lot of the time, open-eye nystagmus was uncontrollable, and for even longer, every time I shut my eyes, they twitched inside the sockets, rubbing against my eyelids. It was hard to sleep. Most effects seemed to come in cycles of 2 weeks, lasting briefly then disappearing, and I briefly also had extreme paranoia. Another side effect was the inability to talk reasonably. Whenever I was in large groups of people, I would talk gibberish, similar to what I heard in my music, saying things that made completely no sense constantly, blabbering on like someone who was brain dead. Many friends did not like this and drifted away. I could barely ever string conversations together without muttering some complete gibberish. I would feel people put chips in my head, and the first time I experienced this, I teared up from realizing it didn't happen after how real it felt. Here's where I realized the side effects were serious. Years prior to the experience, I had a voice in my head that I would associate as the essence of all evil and greed. His voice came back, far stronger and louder. There would be moments where the dialogue in my head became extremely violent and angered, but it wasn't my voice, it was his. For a few days, different voices sounded off in my head telling me I was worthless, probably because I felt guilty about scarring the friends who had to save me and feeling so trampy due to it. It would get to the point where 14 different dialogues would happen inside my head, becoming so loud I couldn't hear any of my thoughts. These short episodes would result in me passing out wherever I was. On around day 4 of having this happen, it was the first time where the voice took full control. It was disturbing. My voice drowned out to the point where it was no longer there. Then it went quiet. It was just him, the essence of all evil, alone in my head. I'm lucky this mostly happened at night when I was alone, because he would take full control of me and my body. He would message people on Snapchat, good friends of mine, telling them the most violent deeds he wished to inflict on them. I would be short-tempered and angry in the day, lashing out at people and even choking them. I realized this voice resonated from inside my physical biology, but in my mind, I couldn't have been further from being him. He was evil, literal evil, telling friends he wished them dead. Of course, this wasn't taken well. I don't blame anyone who was driven from me due to this happening. I was nuts. I was literally telling people how I would want to gouge their eyes out for no reason. It wasn't me trying to be edgy. It was a full-on persona in my head. He usually listened to death grips when he took control, turning my head into a cauldron of rage before it resulted in me eventually passing out. The third time it happened, I defeated him by creating a new persona in my head named Mini-Me, who sat on my shoulder, and when he tried to control him, it was a trap, and Mini-Me killed him, and I was safe. The next time it happened, he simply snapped Mini-Me's neck and took control of me anyway. It was insanity. I couldn't hear myself think. I started hallucinating during the day, seeing objects randomly arc upwards towards the ceiling before coming back down instantly. When I fell asleep, I would see Sauron from Lord of the Rings standing in the corner of my room. I heard people speak right behind me in my ear when no one was around. When he took control of me, he would write lyrics of the most unspeakable thing as notes for me to read, realizing it was me who wrote them. He would turn me into an evil genius and create the most complex designs and objects and aerodynamic packages for cars every time I went to try and sleep. Reality was shattered. I constantly felt as though I was in a simulation or a coma. I thought friends trying to talk to me on Snapchat were agents from the people running the simulation trying to figure out what I knew. I felt watched. I felt monitored. Nothing was real. I was truly all on my own for a while. It allowed me to think of the craziest ideas, some of them truly genius. I tried to construct my ego into shapes to help thought flow. I needed help. I went to my GP and told them about my experiences. They referred me to a psychiatric center. I had weekly sessions over a span of around 5 months or so. They could be tough at times. After the sessions, I would talk to myself instead of thinking in my head, leaving my mind blank. I got better though. I've mended relations with my friends as best as I can, but with some, there are most likely still scars remaining. Around the same time, I also had a few other traumatic experiences that happened to me. I had a genuine and justified fear of being robbed and stabbed every day for a while afterwards, yet I feel most of these experiences were from the bad E. Be careful. It took me months to get better, and I am not the same now. LSD was actually part of what helped me get better, but taking drugs will never be the same again. Do research, be careful, make sure your mind is prepared. I'm 15. I'm lucky my experiences only cost me friendships, rather than a whole lifestyle.